Welcome to the Three Martini Lunch. Grab a stool next to Greg Columbus of Radio America and Jim Garrity of National Review. Three Martinis coming up.
Hey, really glad you're with us for the Thursday edition of the Three Martini Lunch. It's going to be a busy day here for our martinis. First one's kind of mixed. Second one is definitely bad. In fact, double-barrel bad. And the last one is just plumb crazy. So, Jim, let's get right to it. And our first martini deals with the Teamsters. We previewed just a couple days ago that the Teamsters were saying we'll have an announcement about our endorsement on Wednesday. And we thought that despite the Republicans rolling out really the most important hour, their first night of their convention, to Sean O'Brien to talk about his pro-union, anti-right-to-work, pro act, which is terrible for freelancers and so forth, that it's possible Trump would give away a lot to the Teamsters and then watch them endorse Kamala Harris. Well, they did not endorse Kamala Harris, but it's weird that they didn't endorse Donald Trump, because in the statement, Sean O'Brien, the guy who spoke at the convention, said, Joe Biden, he had won the support of Teamsters voting in straw polls at local unions between April and July. Yeah, he was ahead 44-36, according to the data released by the Teamsters yesterday. Then, after Biden exited the race and Harris came in, they poll their members again, and it's Trump 59.6% to Harris 34%, with 6.4% for other candidates. I think between the two of them it was 58-31 Trump. And the explanation from the Teamsters is that the union's extensive polling showed no majority support for Vice President Harris and no universal support among the membership for President Trump. So I guess he needed to win by, 90 points or something, and she
all
only
of them.
Needed to win.
Universal, right? He's got to have 100%
yes.
endorsement. Yeah.
Yes, exactly. So I don't know if he thought that actually going all the way to endorsing Trump would launch 1,000 suns going supernova on the Democratic side and would be hard for his union. But nonetheless, if nothing else, Trump got a no endorsement out of this. So maybe that's worth something. I don't know how much endorsements matter these days, but it's certainly surprising that a large majority of Teamsters members, at least the ones who responded to this survey, preferred Trump to Harris, considering where they were with Biden and Trump just a couple months ago.
Yeah, this is a good martini with a bitter aftertaste. Trump earned that endorsement, or at very least, it was, it's nearly a 2-to-1 split. As I pointed out, you look at all kinds of polling data. Ironically, Teamster membership is probably one of the strongest indicators that you're a Trump supporter, that you don't see that same 2-to-1 split in almost any other demographic. And so by that, and look, the fact that they put out those polling results, you might say that's a shadow endorsement, or at least it's an acknowledgement. And if you're Trump, what you really want are the votes of the Teamster members. And that's what he looks like he's on pace to win by a considerable margin. So all that's the good news. With that said, there are two ways of looking at this. One is that Trump made the most serious, big, bold, good faith outreach to the Teamsters Union that any Republican presidential nominee has ever made. And they didn't quite spit in his face. I mean, a non-endorsement is something of a win, but they didn't hold up their end of the bargain. So on the one hand, he could say, if he is elected president and he wants to do something the Teamsters don't like, he could say, well, you know what, you guys didn't endorse me, even though when I really tried to reach out and win your endorsement, and 2/3 of your members preferred me over Harris. The other way of looking at it, though, is that, Trump gave away the store, or at least, made, again, there's never been a case where a union leader got to give what is effectively is the keynote address at the Republican convention. That's the sweetest spot. That is the biggest, best offer Trump could possibly get there. And all he got in return was a no endorsement and not endorsing Harris when he was the overwhelming preference of the membership. I mean, by that standard, Trump got taken to the cleaners. So, look, I think if you're Trump, it's better than the outcome you probably would have had if you had not made any outcome. But I think he really I would say he got jobbed. I'm using that ironic word choice because the other word you probably would prefer I didn't use on this podcast.
That's no doubt. So I think you're right about the numbers being more important to Trump, obviously, than the official endorsement. And it probably was kind of a thumb in the eye to Kamala Harris. She met with them just a couple of days ago trying to secure the endorsement. And I saw somewhere on Twitter where it was described as tense. So obviously not going the way that she wanted it to. My favorite part of the story, though, because if Nancy Pelosi is really frustrated, something good happened on some level here. She says the Teamsters' decision not to endorse Harris-Walz is disappointing. Donald Trump refused to support a pension bill for Teamsters. It was Biden, Harris, and Democrats who saved Teamsters pensions in the Butch-Lewis Act of our American Rescue Plan without one Republican vote. And she even signed it NP, suggesting that she might have actually tweeted out, which is probably dubious. But nonetheless, if Nancy Pelosi is frustrated, it's not a horrible day.
No, and let me just point out that the really interesting indicator here is that Joe Biden, I'm the most pro-union president in American history. By the way, I just want to point out my Biden impression gets really good right before he's about to leave office. But that, on paper, yeah, this administration has been bad. And the idea that Teamsters don't automatically endorse his vice president, really is something of a slap in the face. So you could make that argument. And the fact that she's barely at a third of Teamster members is an indication that, this demographic, blue collar of all races, but a whole lot of blue collar whites in those blue wall states. Boy, that's if you're the Harris campaign, that you look at that and you're sweating like a Beirut pager salesman.
All right, can't beat that. But speaking of high tech, don't go with that Beirut pager salesman. Go with Oracle. Artificial intelligence might be the most important new computer technology ever. It has the potential to transform every industry, altering the way that you work, live, and interact with the world. But the problem is that AI needs a lot of speed and processing power. So how do you compete without your costs spiraling out of control? Step 1, take a free test drive of OCI at oracle.com/martini.
It's time to upgrade to the next generation of the cloud, Oracle Cloud Infrastructure. OCI offers a complete range of cloud services to meet your needs, whether it's on-premises, hybrid, multi-cloud, or public. Its global network and flexible options tackle your toughest business challenges. It's a single platform for all your infrastructure, database, application development, and AI needs, at 4 to 8 times the bandwidth of other clouds and one consistent price instead of variable regional pricing.
Yeah, that's a huge advantage. So now you can train your AI models at twice the speed and less than half the cost of other clouds. Do more and spend less, like Uber, 8x8, and Databricks Mosaic. Take a free test drive of OCI at oracle.com/martini. That's oracle.com/martini. oracle.com/martini. And we're not done with Nancy Pelosi yet today in today's podcast, but nonetheless, we've got a double-barreled bad martini here, focusing mainly on this one. There's an Inspector General report that investigated how the State Department handled Iran envoy Rob Malley's clearance suspension. So this was a guy who was the Biden administration's key envoy to the mullahs in Iran. And because basically they found out that way too cozy with the leaders in Iran, they suspended his clearance, except for the fact that seems like for a long time, nobody bothered to actually do it. Gabriel Noranha, former employee of the State Department on the Iran front, on Twitter yesterday giving out excerpts of this, saying none of the State Department officials interviewed by the Office of the Inspector General claimed responsibility for determining which tasks Special Envoy Malley could work on, nor did any believe that they were responsible for supervising or monitoring his work. The Chief of Staff believed that former Deputy Secretary Wendy Sherman supervised Special Envoy Malley on a day-to-day basis. Deputy Secretary Sherman told OIG, Inspector General, that while she was engaged with his work, he primarily answered to Secretary Blinken and the White House. However, Chief of Staff George ensured that the Secretary did not engage with Mr. Malley after his clearance was suspended because the Secretary wished to recuse himself from engaging on Mr. Malley's situation, given their long-standing personal acquaintance. And then it goes on that basically all these people thought somebody else was keeping tabs on Malley and making sure that he no longer had access to the classified information. He was consulted regularly on media and congressional testimony despite having no clearance. They even believe he tapped into or called into a classified conference call at the White House, although at that point it's not clear that he knew that his clearance had been suspended. So classic Washington, Jim, whether it's that they didn't want him to actually be out of the loop because they liked him and thought he was doing a good job, or it's just sheer incompetence and everybody thought somebody else had responsibility for doing this. So Robert Malley, once again, having more access to classified information than he should have for longer than he should have.
I just want to clarify, Greg, for all of our listeners, it's Malley. It's pretty. The emphasis is on mal. It's as in Spanish word for bad, or something that stinks, or something that's malignant. The word malignant has that root word. It's mal. Same thing in Malley. So just connect whatever dots you feel are necessary there. So in preparation for Book 7, I've been looking at the enforcement of sanctions against sanctioned regimes. North Korea, Iran, Russia, and the go-to move for this administration when dealing with a hostile foreign state is to enforce trade sanctions, to enforce export controls. You're not allowed to have this stuff, and we're not going to trade with you. And on paper, I don't oppose that, but the very hard lesson that we have seen year after year is that a sanctions regime is only as good as its enforcement. And I know it's going to shock you, but it turns out a lot of effort gets put into, the announcement, and much less about the enforcement. Lo and behold, all over the Indian Ocean, you've got all kinds of boats that are transferring oil from Iran, that are transferring weapons to and from North Korea, trying to get it to Russia, all kinds of banned components that aren't supposed to be going to China. There is no, I don't say there's no enforcement, but there's at best really spotty enforcement. And when a hostile foreign state wants to work around them, they can find ways pretty easily. So in this scenario, let's just imagine that Robert Malley is Iran. I know it's very hard to make that kind of mental connection, but let's just pretend, and think of you can't have access, classified information is anything we don't want these countries to have. Well, lo, what we've enacted, we've said on words on paper, Robert Malley, Iran in this scenario. Are you drawing that mental connection? Malley is Iran, just like Malley, Mal, bad. Okay, just make sure we're clear on that. It's on paper, but no one's actually enforcing it. That doesn't do us any good, now does it? And you can make this comparison to say gun laws, right? All the different gun laws that are on the books. And then they say, well, this person is not allowed to purchase a gun. And then for some reason, a felon gets their hands on a gun anyway. The National Instant Check system doesn't work correctly and they don't check the background, or they mix up the names. Things like that happened to the Charleston shooter. So in the end, there's this mentality at work all throughout, I would argue, Democratic administrations, maybe you can find it in Republican administrations as well, that intent matters and that they intended to enforce this law. Ergo, you can't give them too much grief. No, actually, I think the consequences are what matter. That the actions are, what actions did you take to enforce this? And if you didn't take any action, well, then that law might as well not really exist. And that is where we are. And so shockingly, never mind can the Biden administration enforce sanctions and enforce the rules on Iran. They can't enforce sanctions and the rules on their own administration members. I mean, again, or Malley, is Iran in this role. Remember that. What's
your gut tell you? Mainly incompetence, or, hey, this guy, we like him. The president likes him. So, if nobody knows, no big deal.
I don't know. Because on the one, your first gut reaction would be, he's the administration sees him as one of the good guys, sees this as being, pointless concerns drummed up by Republicans. They're dismissing it. But we really should never underestimate incompetence, Greg. That really is always a strong, you bet on incompetence every single time. You're not going to win every time, but you're going to make a lot of money gambling if you always bet on incompetence. So it's like Wesley Snipes and Passenger 57, always bet on black, always bet on incompetence.
But we're not done with Iran yet, because the AP reporting last night that Iranian hackers sought to interest President Joe Biden's campaign in information stolen from rival Donald Trump's campaign, sending unsolicited emails to people associated with the then Democratic candidate in an effort to interfere in the 2024 election, according to the FBI and other federal agencies. The AP says there's no indication that any of the recipients responded, and several media organizations who have said they were also approached with stolen material did not publish it. Kamala Harris's presidential campaign called the emails from Iran, quote, unwelcome and unacceptable malicious activity, unquote, that were received by only a few people who regarded them as spam or phishing attempts. So foreign interference, I assume there's going to be massive congressional hearings and all sorts of indictments here, right?
Well, first, Greg, don't you love how the Harris campaign statement makes it sound like they were the victims? People tried to send us secret information about our opponent. Let's just take a moment to remember we're the ones who really got hurt by this. If actually, in their minds, maybe that is. Well, we can't use it now because it came from the Iranians. We'd use it otherwise. Now, I've heard, since this came out, I've seen people arguing, this is evidence that Iran is trying to help Harris. I can understand why people would come to that conclusion. I've also heard people say, this is evidence Iran wants to help Trump because this makes Trump look like a victim, and it makes the Harris campaign, if the Harris campaign had used any of it, it would make the Harris campaign look like they were in cahoots with the Iranian regime. And I talked yesterday about how, in the corner, Ohio Governor Mike DeWine had mentioned that the hoax bomb threats that were being called into the schools in Springfield, Ohio, were coming from an unnamed foreign source. Look, there's like a 99% chance it's either Russia, China, or Iran. And we probably should point out that it's not really in keeping with the way China does this stuff. China basically is trying to purchase influence in lower level stuff that we've seen in the New York governor's office, stuff we've seen in the New York mayor's office, a couple other offices, California congressman, Dianne Feinstein's driver, folks like that. So this isn't really fitting their MO. So it's almost certainly the bomb threats are coming from Russia and Iran. DeWine's office doesn't want to put this out there, and I don't really understand why. I don't think it harms anyone to know which hostile foreign state it is. But for all three of them, we should keep in mind, there may be certain figures in Russia who prefer Trump to Harris and vice versa, and in these other regimes. But in the end, these regimes, really, they just want us divided. They just want us too internally at war with each other, our fellow Americans, than to turn our attention on them. They want us paralyzed, and they want to make it look like democracy doesn't function and that their approach to governing is better. So I think that's actually the less, trying to figure out who these hostile regimes want to help or whose side they're on in terms of U.S. domestic politics. I don't think it's a particularly fruitful exercise. In the end, Russia, China, Iran want a weakened United States. That's why we should never do anything that helps them. And also, when they come bearing gifts, it's probably both a literal and metaphorical Trojan horse.
I'm an old-fashioned guy, Jim, so, my take on this might be slightly different. But I figure that the country, or at least elements of the regime that are trying to kill Donald Trump,
it's tough to say that they're helping. Yeah, that's a sign that they're not full-throated MAGA supporters, I think, that they have some doubts.
It's always the subtle details that pop up at times like this. But hey, if you work at the State Department and didn't want Robert Malley getting classified information, yeah, you probably want to pour one tonight, maybe more than one. But if you do that, take Z-Biotics first. I promise you'll feel better the next morning than you otherwise would have.
Z-Biotics pre-alcohol probiotic drink is the world's first genetically engineered probiotic. When you drink, alcohol gets converted into a toxic byproduct in your gut. And it's this byproduct, not dehydration, that's to blame for your rough next morning. Z-Biotics pre-alcohol produces an enzyme that breaks this byproduct down. So just remember to make Z-Biotics your first drink of the night, drink responsibly, and you'll feel your best the next morning.
And Jim said it again there, you have to drink responsibly. It's not going to be a miracle for you if you just drink way, way too much. But if you are responsible and you know your limits, but you maybe go just a little bit over, you will feel better the next day than you otherwise would have, and hopefully don't feel bad at all. So go to zbiotics.com/3ml to get 15% off your first order when you use 3ml at checkout. Z-Biotics is backed with 100% money-back guarantees, so if you're unsatisfied for any reason, they'll refund your money, no questions asked. Visit zbiotics.com/3ml and use the code 3ml at checkout for 15% off. Thank you, Z-Biotics, for sponsoring this episode and our good times. All right, on to the crazy martini now, Jim. And we said Nancy Pelosi would be back. Today, she's gaslighting in this particular crazy martini. Yesterday, Nancy Pelosi sat down for an interview with Katia Goba of Semaphore. And as you can tell from Katia Goba's question, she did not expect Pelosi's answer, because the premise of the question is, thought we were going to get a primary here if Biden dropped out, but everybody just kind of coalesced around Kamala. So what changed? And Pelosi, of course, saying, oh, nothing.
You had reportedly said you wanted a sort of an open primary if Joe Biden stepped down. Did you change your mind because you saw all the excitement around Kamala Harris?
No, I didn't change my mind. We had an open primary and she won it. Nobody else got in the race because she was politically astute. And but that was the thought. Let's show our talent. We have a great bench, all these great people in the country. And the president endorsed her, and that's a big deal. because Joe Biden is the most consequential president of modern times. He accomplished so much more.
So Nancy Pelosi's still trying to grovel back and pretend that she's not the one who knifed Joe Biden in the back in July. She keeps trying to butter him up. I don't think it's going to work. They got long memories over there in the Biden family. But this idea, Jim, that it was an open process, just the fact that everybody immediately zoomed in to endorse Kamala within 24 hours of Biden getting out and endorsing her, it was totally open process. I don't know what you're talking about.
First of all, Greg, Nancy Pelosi said that Joe Biden was the most consequential president of her lifetime. And somewhere in Colorado Circle, Washington, D.C., someone's looking at, excuse me? Did I not bring hope and change? Did you, Nancy? Hello? Meanwhile, somewhere in Chapel, what the hell are you talking about? That is not right. I am by far. Did people know I was the first black president in spirit? I mean, this is a stain on my leg. Well, I shouldn't use that word, but you get the idea. Somewhere in Plains, Georgia, Jimmy Carter, still alive, the man who cannot be killed. Really? I'm almost 100. How dare you, Nancy Pelosi? Do you know how many houses I've built? So anyway, so first of all, yeah, buttering up Biden, I wonder if that ruffles some feathers elsewhere. But second of all, so for a while, I've felt like, so you heard many more Republicans complaining about how Harris became the nominee than you saw Democrats. And there were times where I thought Republicans were making too much of this, that look, everybody always knew that if something happened to Joe Biden, Kamala Harris would become president. And so it's not exactly a shock that she became the nominee. But and you could say that by voting for what was effectively the Biden-Harris ticket, by voting for Biden, you were effectively Biden for Harris to remain a heartbeat away. Now, Joe Biden did not have a heart attack, as far as we know. Joe Biden had a political heart attack on the debate stage and thus became non-competitive. So by that, but let's not pretend that Harris won a competitive primary, right? This is, and by the way, if, let's say, a year ago or after the 22 midterms, Joe Biden had said, I'm not going to run for another term, would Harris be the nominee? Probably, maybe. Newsom probably would have jumped in. You would have had more competitors than Dean Phillips and Marianne Williamson.
Definitely. And
Democratic money would not all have been behind. When she says it's a big deal that Joe Biden endorsed Kamala Harris, is it? Was there a real shot he was going to say, and I've decided Dean Phillips is the best choice to be. No. If he had, by the way, that would have been a declaration that his choice of running mate was a failure. There would be an admission. The first and most important decision I made, America, I totally botched it. I screwed it up. Don't trust me. I have no idea what I'm doing. Of course he was good. No, it's not a big deal, Nancy Pelosi. And I think if I were now it becomes irritating, this contention that Harris won some sort of serious competition back in the early part of the year. And also, let's keep in mind, we've all openly joked about the fact that, Gavin Newsom looks in the mirror, hums Hail to the Chief, and says, "Good morning, Mr. President," every time he's talking to himself, right? So in the end, why did Gavin Newsom not run? Because he believed that if he ran against Biden, he might win, but he would divide the party and he probably wouldn't win the general election. There'd be a lot of bad blood. So everybody gave Biden a pass. If it had been an open primary against a vice president, I don't think everybody else would have given her a pass. And so this is just giving Harris credit for a win that she really didn't earn. I suppose it's nothing new for Nancy Pelosi, but anyway, I just hope that at some point soon she gets together with Barack Obama and Bill Clinton and things are awkward.
Well, I cut the clip off there. Right after it ended there, she actually said that he got more done than Barack Obama. So I'm sure that's going to be super tense. You could actually make a case for Jimmy Carter, given how much trouble Iran has caused over the last 45 years for consequential problems.
Yeah. Nancy, let me be clear. Screw you. I got so much done. How dare you? Coming for you, Nancy.
Jim Garrity, National Review. I'm Greg Corombos of Radio America. Thanks for being with us today. Do support the podcast by subscribing to it. Also, we would love it if you would give us a 5-star rating and a kind review. That always helps us a lot. Get us on your home devices. All you have to say is play 3 Martini Lunch Podcast. Follow us on X. Jim is at Jim Garrity. I'm at Dateline_DC. Have a terrific Thursday. Join us again on Friday for the next 3 Martini Lunch.